You made hundreds of decisions today. What to wear, what to eat, whether to check your phone before you even got out of bed. You move through those moments with quiet confidence. The confidence of someone who believes they are steering. Someone in control. Someone choosing. But what if the choosing had already happened, before you were even conscious of it? This is not philosophy. This is not abstract speculation dressed in academic language. This is what decades of psychological research, neuroscientific study, and behavioral science have been quietly, persistently, uncomfortably telling us. The version of yourself you call you, the aware, reasoning, deliberate self, arrives late to almost every decision it thinks it made. You are not the pilot. You are more often than not a passenger reading the flight log after landing and convincing yourself you flew the plane. In the early 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a study that sent a tremor through the scientific community and through every comfortable assumption we hold about human agency. Participants were asked to perform a simple voluntary action, flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. They watched a clock and noted the exact moment they decided to move. Meanwhile, Libet tracked the electrical activity in their brains. The result was staggering. Brain activity signaling the movement, what scientists call the readiness potential, began up to 550 milliseconds before the participant consciously decided to act. The brain had already initiated the action before the mind knew it was happening. The decision came after the process had begun. If that doesn't unsettle you, read it again. Because what Libet's experiment suggests is that the moment of conscious choice, that sacred instant where you feel yourself authoring your own life, may be less a starting point and more a notification. Your brain acts. Then it tells you about it. Then you write yourself into the story as the hero who chose. Libet was only the beginning. Social psychologist John Bargh spent decades demonstrating how profoundly unconscious forces shape behavior. In one landmark study, participants who were primed with words associated with elderly people, bingo, retired, Florida, walked measurably slower when leaving the room. They had no idea. They reported no awareness, but their bodies had already received the instruction. Your environment is constantly sending instructions you never consciously agreed to read. The font on a menu influences what you order. The weight of a clipboard affects how seriously you take the person holding it. The color of a room alters your risk tolerance. The music in a store shapes how long you stay and how much you spend. None of this passes through deliberate thought. It bypasses the reasoning mind entirely and acts directly on behavior. Psychology calls this cognitive fluency, the mind's tendency to trust what feels easy, familiar, and effortless. And it operates constantly, invisibly, beneath the polished surface of what you call your judgment. So why don't we know this about ourselves? Because the alternative is unbearable. The belief in personal control is not merely a preference, it is a psychological necessity. Researchers have consistently found that when people feel a loss of control, anxiety surges, performance collapses, and identity begins to fracture. The sense of agency, the feeling that I am the cause of my actions, is so fundamental to human functioning that the brain will actively construct it, even when evidence suggests otherwise. We confabulate, we rationalize, we reverse engineer meaning from outcomes we didn't consciously author. And we do it seamlessly, automatically, and without the slightest awareness that the narrative we're telling is a story, not a transcript. The mind is not lying to you out of malice. It is lying to you out of mercy. But mercy, taken too far, becomes blindness. And here is where the real question begins to take shape. Not whether you are in control, but what kind of control is even possible once you understand the machinery running beneath your awareness. If you're not in control, then who is? Here is the uncomfortable truth nobody tells you at the end of the psychology lecture. Awareness alone does not set you free. Knowing that your brain makes decisions before you do. Knowing that your environment quietly scripts your behavior. That your identity is partly a story your mind invented to maintain dignity. None of that knowledge, by itself, changes anything. People can understand cognitive bias in extraordinary detail and still be completely governed by it. Therapists develop anxiety. Nutritionists overeat. Behavioral economists make irrational financial choices. Information is not transformation. So if understanding the illusion doesn't break it, what does? The ancient Stoics had a concept they considered the foundation of all wisdom. They called it the dichotomy of control, the radical, disciplined practice of distinguishing between what is within your power and what is not. They were not naive. They did not claim you could control everything. In fact, their entire philosophy was built on the opposite premise, that most of what you think you control, you do not. Weather, other people, outcomes, reputation, even to a significant degree, your own initial emotional reactions. What you can control, they argued, is far smaller and far more powerful than most people ever realize. Your attention, your interpretation, your next deliberate response. Modern psychology has arrived at the same address through a different road. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, writing from inside a Nazi concentration camp, a place designed to strip every human being of every last illusion of control, concluded that between stimulus and response, there exists a space. And in that space lives human freedom. Not freedom from circumstance. Not freedom from the unconscious, but freedom to choose the meaning you assign to what happens, and therefore, the person you become inside of it. That space is the whole game. You cannot fight your psychology. You can architect it. Here is what separates people who understand behavioral science intellectually from people who actually use it to build exceptional lives. They stopped trying to overpower their unconscious and started designing for it. Because here's what the research also tells us. The same unconscious system that leads you into autopilot behavior can be deliberately configured. Your environment is not just a passive backdrop. It is an input device, and you can program it. High performers do not rely on willpower. Willpower is a resource that depletes. What they rely on is architecture, the intentional design of their physical space, their schedules, their social circles, their default options so that the unconscious system, left to its own momentum, moves in the direction they actually want to go. They remove friction from good behavior. They install friction in the path of destructive behavior. They understand that the brain will always take the path of least resistance, so they rebuild the path. James Clear, in his work on habit formation, calls this making good behaviors obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. But beneath the practical framework lies a profound psychological truth. You are not just a person making choices. You are a system producing outcomes, and systems can be redesigned. Responding, not reacting. There is a difference between a reaction and a response that most people never examine closely enough. A reaction is automatic. It is the unconscious doing what it was trained to do, by your upbringing, your fears, your past, your environment. It is fast, efficient, and almost entirely outside conscious oversight. A response is something rarer. It requires that you catch the moment between trigger and action, that you locate Frankl's space and insert intention into it. Not always, not in every moment, but in the moments that matter most. This is what metacognition actually means in practice. Not thinking more, thinking about your thinking. Watching your own mind the way a skilled coach watches game footage, with curiosity rather than judgment, with strategy rather than self-criticism. The goal is not to eliminate the unconscious. The goal is to collaborate with it, to understand its tendencies, to work with its architecture rather than against it, to become not the person who never loses control, but the person who knows exactly where control lives and chooses to stand there. You began this video believing control was something you either had or didn't. A switch. On or off. In control. Out of control. But psychology offers something far more sophisticated and far more honest. Control is not a possession. It is a practice. It is the ongoing, imperfect, deeply human discipline of noticing where you have drifted to autopilot, choosing to return to intention, designing the conditions in which your best self is the path of least resistance, and meeting yourself, your whole self, conscious and unconscious, with enough understanding to stop fighting your own nature and start working with it. True control was never about domination. It was always about collaboration. Before you move on, before the next video loads, before the next notification pulls your attention somewhere else, stay in this moment for just one more second. And ask yourself this, genuinely. In the most important area of my life right now, am I responding with intention or reacting on autopilot? Not as a judgment, not as a reason to feel behind or broken or out of control, but as the most honest, most useful question a person who understands their own psychology can ask. Because the moment you ask it, truly ask it, you have already stepped into the space between stimulus and response. And that space, that is where you begin. If this made you think differently about the way you move through your day, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The mind that understands itself is the mind that can change anything.